On August 7th, 1964, the United States Senate passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. The House of Representatives had already voted on it in a unanimous vote, unanimously approving it. The U.S. Senate voted 88-2 to approve it, and I will read it. The 88th United States Congress, the first session. Yeah. That's all right. Whereas naval units of the communist regime in Vietnam, in violation of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law, have deliberately and repeatedly attacked United States naval vessels lawfully present in international waters, and have thereby created a serious threat to international peace. And whereas these attacks are part of a deliberate and systematic campaign of aggression that the communist regime in North Vietnam has been waging against its neighbors and the nations joined with them in the collective defense of their freedom, and whereas the United States is assisting the peoples of Southeast Asia to protect their freedom and has no territorial, military, or political ambitions in that area, but desires only that these peoples should be left in peace to work out their own destinies in their own way. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that the Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Now there are a couple other short articles to that, but you get the sense of that resolution.
It's a crock of shit.
Sorry?
Crock of shit.
Well, you got more control of the English language than I do. That's good. They just basically to reflect a lot of you. I was 18 years old. I wasn't paying any attention. I don't know if anybody here was paying attention on August 7th, 1964. Certainly the media was pretty well in line with everything. I'm quoting here from a blogger of a few days ago, which includes a quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson, president at the time, which sort of sets the scene. In 1964, the media unquestioningly repeated the Johnson administration's claim that on August 2nd and again on August 4th, American destroyers innocently cruising in the Tonkin Gulf suffered 2 unprovoked attacks by North Vietnamese PT boats. But on the day after the first attack, in a now declassified phone call, President Johnson told a friend how we had provoked that attack. And this is a quote from President Johnson, ultimately uncovered in the declassification of materials decades later. LBJ, there have been some covert operations in that area that we have been carrying on, blowing up some bridges and things of that kind, roads and so forth. So I imagine they wanted to put a stop to it. So they came out there and fire, and we respond immediately with 5-inch guns from the destroyer and the planes overhead. And we cripple them, knock one of them out and cripple the other 2. Then we go right back where we were with that destroyer, the Maddox, and with another one, the Turner Joe, and plus plenty of planes. You go back a few days earlier than August 7th. The South Vietnamese armed forces, directed by the CIA and U.S. advisors using American weapons, American swift boats, were carrying on attacks in the Tonkin Gulf area with the full knowledge and direction of the United States. I mean, there had been a lot of military sorties before that, but this was the most aggressive on the coast of North Vietnam. So I don't know if you can see the map, but we're talking up in this area here for the Tonkin Gulf. That's just President Obama. On August 2nd, the Maddox, the destroyer of the Maddox, was close to the islands, and there were 3 North Vietnamese PT boats that advanced on the destroyer, and the Maddox fired at them. They fired at the Maddox. The Maddox plus the airplanes from the USS aircraft carrier Ticonderoga basically eliminated one of the patrol boats and disabled the other 2. I think that the destroyer had 1 bullet hole in it. In any case, the United States did not retaliate immediately, but the President Johnson said, don't stop your cruising and go in and nose in there as much as you can, and let them know that we don't want to take any of their crap. Well, and it was a confusing situation. On August 4th, there was reports from the Maddox that there was torpedoes, that there was sonar with enemy craft around, and it was there was a lot of confusion. Ultimately, that night of August 4th, the 2 destroyers were the Maddox and the Turner Joy. One of the gunmen on a gun on the Maddox, I think a 5mm gun, but I'm not a Navy guy, I don't know what that means, but a big gun, and he was getting the radar and sonar. There was a big blip within relatively close range, and he said, should I fire? They gave him orders to fire. Before he fired, he said, I want the Turner Joy to turn their lights on. The Turner Joy flashed their lights on, and it was what was in the sights of the Maddox. If he had fired, 1 destroyer would have destroyed the other destroyer. But in terms of what happened with Washington, D.C., the reports, first off, we denied that we had any involvement in any South Vietnamese operations in that area, and McNamara and others stifled any reports of doubt about the incidents on August 4th. In any case, August 5th, we sent bombers and took out PT boats and oil spots in along the coast of North Vietnam, and prepared the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, sent it to the House, which right away signed off. The Senate, 2 heroes, Ernest Groening and Wayne Morse. Greening from Alaska and Morse from Oregon, said no. Nobody really paid attention to them. It passed 88-2 on August 7th and was henceforth used as the quote legal basis for our war in Vietnam. It was used at least until 1970, when it was finally repealed and replaced with a different authorization. Well, so what difference does it make? We all know what difference it made. You know, 58,000 American lives later, over 1 million Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians dead. Our wall in Washington, D.C., which is about 150 yards long. If we had a similar wall for the Vietnamese killed, it would be a couple miles long. It was, how do you put it? I don't know how to put it. It was a tragedy. There was an airman Air Force veteran from Vietnam who put it rather succinctly a couple days ago. He just said, when our government sends our military personnel to war based on falsehoods, it's not supporting them, it is betraying them. How much more simply put can it be? Well, the United States government right now has a $65 million program underway to recognize the history of the Vietnam War. And President Obama initiated that Memorial Day 2012. Veterans for Peace has launched what they call VietnamFullDisclosure.org, which I think there's a reference to it on the top of your green things. John Jadria will speak to it a bit more, but this says in this government, in the current administration's representation of the history, it does not mention the millions of Vietnamese, including women and children who were captured and tortured and killed. There is no representation of the heroic American soldiers who resisted the American war in Vietnam, nor any real acknowledgement of domestic protest. And the Department of Defense project does not pay tribute to the voices and post-war reconciliation activities of many anti-war veterans. Well, we are part of a counter program here. In addition to remembering the heroism of Wayne Morse and Ernest Greening, remember people like Muhammad Ali, the Berrigan brothers, many others whose names we don't know. But also remember and pay attention to the 5 veterans here tonight who are voices of post-war reconciliation and peace. So it's my pleasure to introduce them. The first guy is open to flattery. Steve Hankin from Cedar Rapids. Steve, I'll get out of your way.
I spent 2 years in Vietnam.
Month pointer?
Excuse me?
Month pointer?
Nope. I think everybody knows about a guy called Calley, Lieutenant Calley in the My Lai Massacre. That happened the year before I got there in my area of operations, about 15 miles from where I was stationed most of the time. I stayed in this unit for 18 months, and then we were assigned to go north to Quang Tri. We were the forward direct support for all the aircraft that flew into Laos in a thing called Lam Son 719, which you will not hear much about, and I haven't even found much out about it. We lost lots and lots of aircraft. When we went up there, we went and took the entire division's aircraft. When we came back, we brought 4. That was all that was left. The rest of them either went over ours or they're still laying out there in that jungle. And some of their crews are still not back. Now when it comes to what happened today, 50 years ago, I can't tell you much. Because I was going between 8th and 9th grade. And I was living out on a farm out by Prairieburg, Iowa. About as far from anything that was going on that you could get. Just to show you how strangely this is, because it's so long ago. My wife was 7 years old, and her major concern was she had a marriage proposal from another 7-year-old on the bus. For many of us, when it came to war, in Vietnam in particular, we were just about as dumb as that 2nd grade kid. Those in their youth make their best cannon fodder because they don't think. And they think that they'll live forever and nothing bad will ever happen to them. But when I arrived in Vietnam in 1969 on a commercial airliner flying into Bien Hoa, I looked down and I could see an artillery attack taking place. And things were getting really serious at that point in my life. Still, after completing over 18 months in Vietnam and heading into my final extension, because I was foolish enough to make 2 extensions, I was still naive. And I was thinking that there was some moral reason that we should be there, but maybe I was just not too smart enough to figure it out. I had the opportunity to go to Saigon, and I and a friend went into an NCO club, non-commissioned officers club for all you non-military people, and they had a floor show. We went to the front of the floor show, and there was one man sitting at a table all by himself in civilian clothes, which was really an anomaly, because people do not sit around in Vietnam in civilian clothes in NCO clubs because you're supposed to be in uniform. So I asked him, why was he not in uniform? And he says, well, I'm retired military. Which gave me pause, like, if you're retired, what in the hell are you doing here? And he says, well, do you want to know what I do, or do you want to know what I really do? And I'm going like, huh? And he says, well, I worked for USAID. USAID was our government's way of providing humanitarian aid to the South Vietnamese. And his job was he worked in the school system. I'm going, you're in the military, retired, and you're in the school system. What in God's name are you doing there? Oh, he says, oh, you're talking about what do I really do? And I says, okay, what do you really do? He says, I keep track of people. And I says, then I don't get it. He says, when people go to school, he says, it's like every other school in the world. He says, they have parent-teachers conferences. They have music events. Anything that your kids are in, the parents are supposed to be there. But if they're not, we keep track of them. I was mystified. Well, what do you do with that? He says, well, we correlate that with VC tax collectors in the area. And if Papa San does not show up on a particular night that we know that VC tax collectors in the area, we take note of that. And I says, and what then? And he says, if we've had several occurrences where Papa San is missing, and there's been a VC tax collector in the area, we make the assumption he's either the tax collector or he has something to do with it. Again, foolish me. I said, so then what do you do? He says, we send out a team, we knock on his door, and we put a bullet in his head. At this point, I'm going like, this is the biggest punch of bullshit I've ever heard in my entire life. But I never forgot it because I thought it was the best bullshit story I'd ever heard. When I got home, after a little time in Europe, I sat down and read a book by a major who retired early because he could not morally put up with what the military was doing anymore. And he began to tell me exactly what I'd heard in that bar in Vietnam 2 years before. Word for word. It was called Project Phoenix. And it was an assassination project that went on for a number of years. And the reason it went on so long is because it worked. But God knows how many people that were innocent that were killed. We don't know that. We just assume they're all the enemy, just like we did when we did the body counts in Vietnam. If we shot them, they're dead, they're red. That's the bottom line. For me, this is the beginning of what we have today. Except today, instead of some unknown person running a hit program on people, we have the President of the United States assassinating people around the world. Not only is he assassinating people around the world, he's assassinating American citizens without due process. That's in violation of our constitutional rights. For all I know, there could be all kinds of programs like this going on. For myself and for my kids and my kids' kids, this has got to come to a stop. Someplace along the line we've got to come to some sort of peace and justice in the world. We got to start getting on the straight and narrow and start dealing with people like we would want them to be dealing with us. The things that you learn in the 2nd grade, for God's sakes, we don't know, or we've forgotten, at least in White House and in the Pentagon and in Washington, D.C. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ed and introduce the next person. Thank you, Steve.
Time for our first spiritual. You got the chartreuse colored sheet. Song number 1, Flag Decal. Now, not everybody knows this, but by the first or second chorus, you'll know, second verse, you'll know the chorus. So, I need a couple singers, like Jadriev and Deaton, and anybody. You could come up or you could sing from where you're at, but let's do it.
Okay.
All right. You want to come in after we're started, or do you want to give us a tone?
I'll give you the beginning note.
Okay, cool. While digesting Reader's Digest in the back of a dirty bookstore, a plastic flag with gum on the back fell out on the floor. Well, I picked it up and ran outside, slapped it on the window shield. And if I could see old Betsy Ross, I'd tell her how good I feel. But your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. We're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Now Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reason for, and your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. Well, I went to the bank this morning, and the cashier said to me, if you join the Christmas club, we'll give you 10 of them flags for free. Well, I didn't mess around a bit. I took him up on what he said, and I stuck them stickers all over my car and run out my wife's forehead. But your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. We're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Now Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reason's for, and your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. Well, I got my window shield so filled with flags I couldn't see, so I ran my car upside a curb right into a tree. By the time they got a doctor down, I was already dead, and I'll never understand why the man standing in the pearly gates said, but your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. We're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Now Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reason's for, and your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. Thank you. Never going to make it but I would like to introduce our out-of-state Veterans for Peace. Paul Appel from Illinois, member of Veterans for Peace Chapter 161. Paul, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
Yeah, I was in
the bullhorn?
No, unless we can't. I was in Vietnam 70, 71. Towards the end, I got sucked out of graduate school up at Iowa State. And basically, about 80% of the unit that I was in charge of were Vietnamese, so I had a little different experience. But I'd like to, my 5 minutes, first of all, read a poem to you that I wrote that deals with an experience I had just before I went to Vietnam, an experience in Vietnam, and then one that happened a few years ago. It sort of ties it together. The poem is Messenger of Death. Flip, flip, the numbers on the odometer turn over. One less mile till I have to deliver the message from Dover. Thump, thump goes the mother's fist against my chest. Not enough miles to think of a justification for her son's eternal rest. As the odometer of life flips on with each setting sun, I find myself writing another mother about the death of another son. Though separated by miles of ocean and in a hot, exotic place, I feel her fists pound my chest because for my lost soldier, I could not make a justifying case. Though months, years, decades on my odometer turn over, like the phantom pain of a lost appendage, the thump thump is forever. In Iraq, a boy from my small community can no longer take breaths. The pounding thump thump tells me this of all these Iraq and Vietnam War deaths. Waste, 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 waste. General Sherman, before he burned down Atlanta, said that war is hell. My experience was that war was not hell, because in hell, the innocent don't do the suffering. The unit that I had sponsored an orphanage. It was about a half-hour's drive from where I was. It was run by two Catholic nuns. Every few weeks we'd find out what they would need. We'd load a deuce and a half up with materials. And after we unloaded it, we would go into a large courtyard where the kids were so we could interact with the kids. It was like walking into a pen of puppies. They were so starved for attention. A few of them were missing arms and legs. A few were exhibiting scars from napalm and white phosphorus. But the vast majority were rejected by their mothers and the villagers because they were of mixed race. Their fathers were U.S. soldiers. The last time I visited there was with the sergeant that I had, Sergeant Major Pag, who was the most battle-hardened soldier I ever met. He was Filipino. During the World War II, led a guerrilla group in the Philippines. Afterwards, joined the U.S. Army, served in the Korean War, and this was his third tour in Vietnam and last tour anywhere. And when we got up to leave the courthouse, we had to pry the little kids' fingers off of our pants when we left because they so much wanted us to take them with us. And about 5 minutes into our drive back to the site, the tears started to flow. And I glanced out the side of my eyes over at Sergeant Major Pag and saw that the front of his shirt was as wet as mine. And when we both spoke, we basically said the same thing. What kind of people are we to condemn these little knee-high innocent kids to a life of pain and suffering?
You got delayed a little bit, so you're first. You want bullhorn? I didn't think so.
Well, like the rest, I'm 66 years old, and I volunteered for the draft and got drafted to the Marine Corps in St. Louis. I spent 8 weeks in California, and then right to Vietnam I went. I went to July 1st. When I got off the plane, he was getting incoming. First thing they handed me was a 16 and said, "This is your partner for the rest of your tour. You're not going to do anything else but use this." I was a 35-31. I was supposed to be a truck driver. I was supposed to haul ammo and stuff like that. Well, I ended up with a rifle. I went to Chu Lai too. I was stationed with the Force Logistics Command in July. The only trouble is that what I can talk about and what I can explain is two things, because as said before, I was involved in black ops in the Marine Corps out of July. There's things that we did as a group I'm not proud of, but I can't talk about it. I can just tell you that we're just as guilty now as we were back then about treatment of prisoners. There's no difference. The United States is holding back so much from the American people. It's unbelievable. I got wounded twice in Nam. I got one in July and I got one in Da Nang with the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing. And I was put up for my Purple Heart. Well, I beat my papers back from Nam back to the States. In the process, my papers got lost and I never got put up for my Purple Heart. I went to Lejeune. I got transferred out of Lejeune, or discharged out of Lejeune, so I automatically applied for my Purple Heart. And I said, hey, I got wrote up by Craig Smith, Lieutenant Craig Smith in the Marine Corps, and I said, he wrote me up for the Purple Hearts I never received. Well, I talked to Dave Lodesack here in Iowa City, and he said he'd see what he could do. Well, the only trouble is all my papers come back blacked out. And he asked me what that meant, and I said, well, Dave, I said, as a representative, you should know about this. I said, this is stuff that you ain't even supposed to know about. I said, I was in Cambodia, I was in Laos, before the Khmer Rouge took effect in '75, I was in before that. When Nixon said that there's no American soldiers in Cambodia, the only trouble is we were already there. I had already been there for 8 months. Every time I wrote a letter home, my grandmother wrote me back and said, how come all this is blacked out? And I said, that's because they don't want you to know what I'm doing. I can't tell you what I'm doing. I tried to call through the Mars system in July back to the States to talk to my, and they would blank out as I'm talking that they don't want somebody to hear. Well, that's all the bad things that I've seen a lot of bad things in Nam. There were some awful, beautiful things. I was in northern, in Da Nang, I went 30 miles north to what's called Iwan Pass. And then standing up there with a friend from the two friends from the Army, we took pictures. And I did a scan shot of Da Nang from 30 miles away up in the mountains, and it's a beautiful shot. People ask me, well, why did you take that picture? And I said, because of all the destruction that we did as Americans in Nam, all the stuff that I seen in Nam, I said, I can't explain different things, certain things. I said, this is one thing that I'm proud of that I can explain to people. There was a good side, but there was really, on the other side, there was a hell of a lot more that the American people still to this day, because I got the records to prove it. You can go to Dave Lodesack's office and talk to Virginia, and she'll tell you. I went Quantico, Denver, all the special op places to get my information for my Purple Heart or my duty. As far as they know, all I have is the DD-214, which I got discharged with. Everything after that, or before that, there's nothing available. So I'm just, one of them poor GIs that has to listen to what everybody else says and think, yeah, and they're doing that. So that's my story.
Tom, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll hold it for you.
How can you hear me?
Good.
All right. My experience with the Tonkin Gulf Resolution was that I didn't know anything about it. I was working in a summer camp in northern Wisconsin, and my main concern there, well, to put it delicately, was to consummate a romantic relationship. And we didn't have television there, we didn't have much in the way of radio news, so I probably didn't read about it until I read about it in a magazine once I got started back to school in my sophomore year at Illinois Wesleyan University. And it was just like a storm cloud on the horizon for me. I didn't expect that there was anything that was going to come of it, or it was going to be over with by the time I finished my degree. And that, of course, wasn't the case. And I managed to get another deferment for a year's master's program, but that was all I could get, and I decided to enlist in the Air Force to become a pilot. It was after that that I saw Vietnam 3 or 4 times for a total maybe of 12 to 16 hours. So my experience with Vietnam was very surreal in comparison to what you may have heard from some others. And I say surreal in the sense of being dreamlike, or being a state of existence that nothing quite fit, nothing was quite logical. I remember when I first got off the plane in the first flight into Da Nang or Tan Son Nhut, I don't remember which. I thought that the auxiliary power unit, the supplementary engine that provides power when the plane is on the ground, I thought it was left on in such a way that the exhaust was blowing across my face, or another aircraft was coming a bit too close or something. But that was how hot it was, all over. In fact, I looked to my right as I was coming off the aircraft, and I saw this fuzzy thing kind of standing on the side of the aircraft, about as big as my hand. It was a moth, and that moth was clinging to the coolest thing it could find, that airplane that just came down. And that heat, I don't know how to describe it. It was more than anything I've ever really experienced in terms of really being hot. But we were only there long enough for the plane to unload its cargo, reload new cargo, and refuel. And we were back in the air within 2 or 3 hours, because a C-141 Starlifter 4-engine jet is a big target. And so we didn't want to stay on the ground any longer than we had to, for fear of catching mortar fire. And so I do remember one time I flew in the wee hours of the morning, and there was a lot of activity, a lot of people loading and unloading airplanes. And we walked by a young airman sitting on a coffin, smoking a joint and reading a comic book. Now, I don't think that anybody in those coffins minded, but you know, it struck me, that particular image struck me as particularly surreal. And then they started to load these coffins onto the plane that we were flying out. And they dropped 2 of them on the tarmac. Finally, the aircraft commander that was with us came up to him and said, you know, have some decency, and the loadmasters on our crew supervised getting the rest of them on. But at that time, they were just loaded on like other cargo. There were no flags draped over them. It was just, what was surreal about it was that it was just another part of the cargo that we flew out of there. I do feel much better about flying air medical evacuation missions from Southeast Asia. We would usually arrive at Scott Air Force Base and then distribute from there the various soldiers who were wounded and returning to the States. So one thing that I can say that I feel especially good was that I brought wounded soldiers home and I brought fallen soldiers home. But and one other thing I would say, there's something about seeing what a war zone looks like from 33 or 35,000 feet. Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, we flew over it several times, yet looked like the surface of the moon. What was a lush and intricate rainforest and cultivated rice paddies and so forth looked like a huge construction zone with craters and a lot of things dug up and a lot of areas which were exfoliated with Agent Orange. It was almost like terraforming a planet in science fiction. You know? And I think what strikes me about that is all that loss of life, all that destruction was Vietnam. It didn't have to happen. It did not have to happen. Sadly, I have to say that the lives that were taken, soldiers' lives, U.S. servicemen's lives, and many times more Vietnamese lives, did not have to be taken. They were lost in vain. And that's what we need to keep in mind. We need to get the narrative right. We need to insist upon our news and media to get the full information, to get the true information, get balanced information, and profit and return on investment be damned.
Yay! Yay.
The situation that we have at different places in the world that are capable of setting off a spark of more wars bigger than the Israeli-Gaza war. I would say search for the truth. So when you see Vladimir Putin portrayed as the evil bastard who we really should be putting into a grave, maybe he is, but also look at what is it that is causing the tension in the Ukraine. If we only get half of the story, we are no better off than those 88 senators in 1964 who voted yes. It took them, you know, Lyndon Baines Johnson didn't run again. Nixon won twice with the idea that he was going to bring an honorable peace, but it just involved another 30,000 Americans being killed after he was elected. We don't have to do that kind of stuff, but we got to insist on the truth. So thank you for being here, and after John, then we'd be happy to take some questions. John Jadrian.
Thank you. You want to start? I'll be brief. I was trained as a combat engineer at Fort Leonard Wood, and I was drafted. I was a reluctant warrior, and sent to Vietnam. And I was older because I was 25 when I got drafted. There's a story behind that. So I was a little older. I wasn't as eager as some of these young kids to take chances, and I didn't want to be out there doing mine sweeping on the roads and digging up booby traps and stuff like that. So I wanted to get the headquarters platoon. I didn't want to be in the second platoon. I want to be in headquarters with the clerks and the cooks. So I brown-nosed my way to be a Jeep driver for the commanding officer. Little did I know that our commanding officer at that time was a West Point graduate. He knew more than anybody else. We were the division engineers. He got all the interesting assignments, and I got to go with him, okay, because I was his driver. So in that course of time, we evaluated, I didn't, but he did, and other members of the team, I just drove, went along for the ride, evaluated river crossings, bridges and roads, so that our heavy tanks and things could get over them, because they weren't built for the kind of pounding that our equipment was going to deliver to them. And then we'd either build bridges adjacent to them or reinforce them. But in that time, I got to be in about 9 of the provinces in Vietnam, all in this area here, from what they call Three Corps or Phan Thiet, Xuan Loc, Am Tan, Bien Hoa, My Tho, this whole area. And what my takeaway from that was this: that the rural population weren't interested in big outcomes, even national outcomes. They were just wanting to survive, get out of the way, and eke out a living in a subsistence economy. And of course we upset that a lot. Ed, 40 years later, Ed introduced me to Veterans for Peace, where I was asked a question: having risked everything for war, what are you willing to risk for peace? The handout, excuse me, the handout gives you a website called Full Disclosure. And in Full Disclosure, there's an open letter to the American people. And here's an excerpt from it. Today we are viewing this as an opportunity to truly examine what happened during those tragic and tumultuous Vietnam years, and use those lessons to turn American policy and shape a better future for ourselves and other nations. The U.S. seems as committed as ever to military interventions, heedless of the consequences for the invaded and occupied, or even for those called upon to invade and occupy. So, if anything that comes of this, it's resist in any way you can. Thank you.
Amen.